Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome back. A new week. Appreciate you taking some time. We're in August now. The summer is kind of flying by, which good and bad, I guess. I mean, it's vacation time that's leaving, but I'm a sucker for fall weather. So like the sooner we can get to September, I'm always at my happiest. Like give me spooky season, give me Thanksgiving, give me the build up to the holidays. I'm all for it. But still, my wife and daughter are home a little bit more on the summer, so hoping to hold on to that. But story for a different day. Over these past few weeks, I think if you've been following along, listening, you've seen me bring in some other, I'll call you guys peers from the recruitment industry that have kind of given some insight, shared some different perspectives of the recruiting process and how it varies since I'm in manufacturing primarily. So the style of my recruiting and the positions that we hire for are going to be a little bit different than a sales focused recruiter or a healthcare focused recruiter. So this week I have a returning guest, Katy. You might remember her from, it's been about a year now, I think.
Yeah,
Last on here with me to discuss the company that you started, what drove you to do that and what your mission is from a recruitment perspective. So Katy, just wanted to start off by giving you some time to refresh the audience's memory here of just the path that led you to starting your own company, going into business for yourself, and in the meantime support other people that are trying to do something similar to what you accomplished.
absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. So, yes, as Matt said, my name's Katy Garvey, and I am the CEO of Recruit Ed, which is I like to call it a niche talent acquisition company. And the reason the ed is on the end because all the candidates I work with are educators. So, the backstory of it is that I spent about 17 years in education as a secondary high school, mostly, well, no, high school teacher. I taught high school Spanish outside of Washington, D.C. in the Virginia suburbs. And then transitioned where I was an assistant principal and then finished up my career as a middle school principal in Northern Virginia. And a whole long story about me leaving education, but I'm not going to get into that. But I decided that what was in my heart was to transition to the corporate world or to try to. And I did that successfully. However, the process was very daunting, and I was kind of surprised by that a little bit. And this was about 8 years ago, 7 years ago. So I was surprised, and I just kind of sat on that for years. And friends would reach out from time to time saying, hey, which I'm sure you know this from your background too, but hey, I'm looking to maybe leave education and start something new. How did you do it? And so I'd give tips, like just informal tips about resumes, and here's who I worked with, and this girl's great for helping with your resume and making it more corporate. And then I started to talk to some recruiter friends of mine when I had a friend who was leaving, trying to leave education, and I'd say, hey, Matt, like, can you help my friend Amanda? And a lot of times, and you kind of mentioned this in the beginning, a lot of times the recruiters would say, I wish I could, but I recruit for the healthcare industry and we really need someone with a little bit of healthcare experience.
Right.
And there was kind of always like oh, I would, but.
Yeah.
So then I kind of got my wheels turning and I'm like, one of the parts, and this is where I feel like now that I've learned a lot about career clarity and stuff like that from other people in the field, the part that I enjoyed most about my job in administration in schools was hiring.
Mhm.
And I always realized that hiring the right teacher was so important, at least in the state of Virginia, because it was very hard to get rid of a teacher once they were hired.
Right.
So, I mean, nearly impossible, which is a topic for another day. But I really enjoyed meeting people and interviewing and hiring these awesome people to bring into my school community. So I thought, how can I like fix this problem of transitioning educators and my passion for recruiting and hiring and all that? So I thought, you know what? I'm going to start my own recruiting company called Recruit Ed, where I help companies who are looking to outsource their hiring needs
Mhm.
But like why I call it niche is that the candidates I'm working with to bring forward to these companies are all educators looking to transition to the business world.
Yeah.
So I don't work with people like in the business world trying to pivot to the business world. So to a different place. So I'm really helping that population of transitioning educators try to make that leap as best as possible, and then bringing companies candidates and putting them forth. So that's kind of how the idea came about in my background. Like I said, I have the 8 years experience in corporate America, kind of with my education background. So kind of used that and meshed it into one and started my recruiting firm about 2 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and obviously a big fan of what you're doing. I've had you on now a couple times, and you know, as someone who made the move from education into a new industry, I know the struggles, and you know, to have that resource available is certainly important. So the purpose of our conversations today and these past few weeks has been about the candidate experience. And obviously I wanted to bring you in because you can offer a few different unique perspectives, because you're working with specific candidates, and you're also the boss and CEO, so you get to kind of say
Right.
this is the standard for the candidate experience. You know, no one's kind of saying, Katie, this is how you need to do things. You can actually say, this is how I want to do stuff. So
Right.
you know, that first step in creating that positive candidate experience is understanding why they're looking to make the move, what they're looking for out of you. You know, why should I partner with you? You know, what are some of the things that you have that can create this rewarding experience? Because there's a lot of frustration with recruiters right now, and it's because some of them have different KPIs, goals, metrics that they have to hit, and it
That's
some
right.
impact the overall experience. So for you as the one that sets your own goals and metrics and KPIs, you know, what are some of those things that you come into in terms of these are what I want to, these are the things I want to do for you as
Yep.
that I'm working with.
Great question and very true what you said. So, for me, and like you said, I kind of get to one of the things that is important to me is both the candidates and the companies that I work with having a great experience. And
Mhm.
I think I can do that as a small business owner because I don't have hundreds of clients that I'm working with companies. Now, there are hundreds of teachers, and that's different. Like, again, but how do I keep that relationship going? So, the first thing I think I thought of is that I'm all about transparency. So I do tell the candidates I'm working with, in this case, transitioning educators, I am very upfront with them in that I am not I think it's important for me to be clear and anyone to be clear about like what my role is with this company or with this positions. Because like you said, it's going to be different depending what company you're working for, what metrics you might have to meet, all
Yeah.
that stuff can impact the experience. But what I do is I say, hey, listen, I am working with a handful of companies. I'm not a job board. I'm not going to send out you might not hear from me,
Mhm.
but you might. And I can't promise either way because a lot of it just depends on what job I get. Where is it in person? And are you in that area or willing to relocate? So I think transparency and communication is so important as a recruiter. And I think if you do it up front, then people understand the expectation going forward. And I always say, listen, don't just work with me. Like you need to explore other recruitment agencies, explore other companies because everyone does something different. But I also think it's important to tell people up front very basic things like the job description, the salary, the start date, the expectations, the size of the company, and then personal anecdotes. So if I know someone who works at XYZ company, or I will usually put in a little personal touch saying, hey, by the way, I have a former colleague that works at this company and they have had a great experience. Or, hey, Matt is a recruiter there and he's a transitioning teacher and he told me transitioning educators there. So clearly they're open to that. Or some sort of like, that's kind of what I mean by a personal anecdote. But I try to communicate as best as I can up front the expectations, like for people, for me, as well as what positions I have and what they're looking for also, and that I'm really trying to make a match.
Yeah.
So like sometimes, just again, like that I'm one piece of the puzzle, the job search puzzle. And so don't always put all your eggs in one basket. And just to have clear expectations going in, I think is really important for both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you brought up a good point about how important communication is. And that's kind of one of the things you hear from candidates a lot is, I'm not hearing back, or it's been a few days, et cetera. And, for you as someone that you said it might be some time in between our communication points. What are some of the ways that you still try to maintain some touch point, even though if it's, I don't have anything yet, but just wanted to let you know that I'm still thinking of you, still have you in mind for things that come across. How do you try to
Yeah.
train yourself to stay on top of that?
So that's a great question. So, and I've done some different things, I will say. I kind of, for a while last year, and I'll probably start it up after the summer, I did like a monthly email blast. And that was less personalized, but more like, hey, here's what's going on in the recruiting world, in my world, with my positions, the companies I'm working with, anything really that kind of was going on in my world that month, I would share.
Okay.
I got away with that in the summer just because like everybody's schedules are kind of weird and mine was too. And people are on vacation and whatever. I also try to utilize social media through like my Recruit Ed,
Mhm.
like mainly Instagram and LinkedIn, but trying to just kind of, again, tell what I'm up to, what's going on, communicate that way. And then obviously, personal emails when appropriate. I always tell people up front, and it actually reminds me of when I was teaching, what I would tell parents. I might not always have the time or capacity to reach out to you.
Mhm.
But if you ever want to check in with me, it's very easy for me to send you a response.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and be like, oh, hey, thanks for checking in. I don't have anything right now, but you are definitely, I still have you in mind. Thanks for, coming back like around and circling back up with me. I never mind that ever. And I tell candidates that. And again, it just reminds me of like how I tell parents, like, check in with me anytime. Because I have, like right now, I'm working with, I think the last time I checked, it was about 630 transitioning educators. So that's a lot of people to think. I mean, that would be more than a full-time job. So, but I don't mind if you check in with me and I'll be as transparent and honest as I can. So again, like some of those more mass ways I know aren't as personal, but then I do try to check in with people as much as possible. Sometimes another thing I like to do as best as possible is people who have gotten hired through me. I like to check in on them every now and again, just see how they're doing. Sometimes I send a little handwritten note to a company or a candidate and just saying, hey, I was just thinking about you. Hope you're doing well, something like that. So I do think there's ways you can personalize it,
Yeah.
like to keep it more intimate, but then there's ways that, you just have to like an email blast
Mhm.
sometimes is just necessary to get information out in a quick way. But even like DMing on Instagram or LinkedIn, like a direct message. And I'm pretty good with telling candidates on LinkedIn, like, hey, send me an email. It's easier for me to keep track of there. And I'm, again, very transparent. Like, I
Yeah.
might miss your LinkedIn message, but if you send me an email, it's easy for me to keep track of and I will respond to you there. So, of
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of go off of the communication aspect and that because there's going to be delays and uncontrollable aspects,
course.
especially for you since you're partnering with the candidate and the company, you're waiting for feedback from two different parties here, and sometimes in either direction, it's just not coming as quickly as someone might expect. So, how do you work to maintain that positive relationship that you've been developing when these things happen in either instance, whether it's we haven't heard back from the candidate yet after extending an offer or after the interview or vice versa, we haven't heard back from the hiring team after
Yeah,
them on
that's
site.
a great question. So, actually, I'll start with not hearing back from the hiring team. I do, and that happens, right? Like, especially right now, like people are on vacation.
Yep.
Or just, I mean, companies get busy, they have different busy seasons. So I do tell my candidates, I'm again very upfront. Actually, just recently, someone got like a rejection email, and it wasn't personalized. It was a very, I mean, it was a very like, I'm sorry, we moving different direction. And I said, oh, did you get any feedback? And the person said no. And I think they were a little disappointed by that. And I said, again, I'm kind of the facilitator, but it's not my company, right? But I do know from working with this company in the past that they typically do give feedback after if I ask for it. So I said, hang tight. When the time's appropriate and they're done with their process, I will ask if they have any feedback.
Mhm.
And if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't.
Right.
But I do think it's important to try to get feedback for candidates whenever possible, even if, and usually people are pretty open to that.
Yeah.
It's not going to be lengthy necessarily. And I think people need to manage their expectations that it
Right.
could just be a couple quick things
Mhm.
thing. And I truly think it is most companies are willing to give that feedback, especially if a candidate's to the point where they're coming in for an in-person interview or a Zoom or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the candidates not getting back to me, I do get a little more frustrated, I will say. I don't know. It like really, I'm like, oh my gosh, like gonna help you get this job
Yeah.
and you're not responding to me in a timely fashion. So I do think, I mean, it is what it is at the end of the day, but I do think if you're working with a recruiter and looking for a job and you're serious about it, you do need to like monitor your email.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, even if you're on vacation, if you're looking for a new job, sometimes, well, actually, a lot of times, time is of the essence. So people will move on to the next candidate, or it just leaves a bad taste a little bit in your mouth, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
When
Absolutely.
someone, if I was applying for a job, I would be checking my email all the time.
Yeah.
So again, it's just now that's probably just me too, but some of it is professionalism, and that also speaks to the recruiter a little bit
Mhm.
and speaks to the hiring company, like,
Yeah.
and I think you want to maintain professionalism whenever you can. Of course, things come up and emails go into spam and emergencies happen and things happen, of course, but just be upfront with that if it does and let people know, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that I didn't get back to you or whatever. But
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you make a great point that the recruiter always kind of feels like this is a reflection on them, and it's
yeah,
uncontrollable. So at the same time, it's tough to not get frustrated. But like you said, there's so many variables that you just don't account for sometimes when you're going through this process. So
that's right. I just actually had a candidate that like kind of she was a front runner and she dropped out of the process. And like you said, I'm like, no, because
yeah.
it does, you can't help. I mean, it does reflect on me, honestly, at the end of the day. Hopefully, like I said before, like you've built a good relationship with a company that they know, oh, this isn't Katie. This isn't
Right.
typical. This doesn't happen a lot. But I do think that's why building these relationships and being very upfront and communicative and people know that that's not the norm.
Yeah.
They'll know that. So I think that's important
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
things happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so you mentioned feedback, and that was one of the questions I had for you because, I agree. It's important to give feedback when you can, when you get it from the hiring managers. But then there are those times where the feedback that you get is not necessarily going to be beneficial to the candidate. They lacked a specific thing in their past experience, or this person had a certificate that just really aligned that they don't have. And, you're not going to encourage someone to pursue a certificate that they might ultimately not need down the road anyway. So, how
Right.
do you try to balance that since you're kind of getting to work directly with the candidates in this instance and want to coach them along? How do you kind of do that feedback and give it to them in a way that it's going to help them, even if sometimes it may not be that beneficial?
That's a really good point and a great perspective. I do think, to be honest, that some of my experience in education, especially in administration, kind of helped me with that skill
Mhm.
because it's funny. I think I don't know, I've said it to my friends before, but like there's a little bit of an art of like massaging a topic.
Yeah.
Like it's like when you'd have to send an email to an angry parent
Yeah.
or a teacher like that was really upset about something, and you kind of have to soften it is the best way I can say. But like some of my friends are like, man, you can make that email like, you can soften it to a point where it gets the same message across, not rude or insensitive,
Mhm.
but it really makes them feel good, but at the same time communicates an honest message. So I think there's a little bit of an art to that.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, I think some people are better at it than others because, you know, you talk about like two compliments and a thing to improve on. Like I think that kind of goes a long way, or like make it a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You know, like you want to point out some positives. I always want to point out some positives.
Mhm.
And then because there are, okay, everybody, I mean, usually there are positives. And then maybe say, and hey, or being honest with people and saying, listen, they really needed this certification, but take that with a grain of salt because I don't know that I'd put a lot of time or money or investment into that because from what I've seen, now, if you want to, obviously that's great, but from what I've seen, that's maybe not going to help you in the long run. And just telling people like, again, I always use the phrase like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like, there are so many opportunities and certifications and different things. So I think it's important to be transparent, be honest, but also present it in a way that's professional and polished and just making the candidate feel good. Because to be honest, I'm not he even when like you don't hire someone, or when I was an educator and I wouldn't hire someone, or someone would have to get de-staffed and switch to a different school, you have to deliver that in a way that doesn't crush somebody. At least that's very important to me. So
Yeah.
I always value someone's worth and feelings and validation and try to point out, yes, you were short in this area, but you brought all these other things. And sometimes it's not what you're doing wrong. It's just maybe what someone else had more experience with, or does a little bit better, or has a little bit more experience. So I think kind of just, trying to paint a whole picture for someone and keep them motivated, even though this wasn't their chance.
Yeah.
But I know that's tough because rejection's tough. And
Right.
I've been there like a lot of times. So I think it's just kind of trying to balance it, but then being transparent as much as possible. And maybe there's some things like, sometimes a company will tell you something and you're like, I don't really need to share that. I mean, it was like such
Yeah.
a minuscule thing that like it just wasn't a good fit. But
Right. All right, so a little bit more then on the candidate experience side of things, because there's so many different things that are important to different candidates, and it's not a one size fits all type of recruitment process and candidate experience that you can create, because some things are going to be more important to one candidate and not important at all to others. So, how do you try to pull that information out as well when you're having those conversations? If someone wants to prioritize, mental health in the workplace, or in our side sustainability is huge for a lot of people that are interested in working in our industry. So, how do we make sure that we're showcasing that in the opportunities we're providing? What would you say are some of the ways that you dig into the candidates that you're working with to make sure that you can help them prioritize and then that you can prioritize for them?
that's a great question. That's a really good question, very thought provoking. And the way I would honestly probably approach it, which could be a little bit different, honestly, is because a lot of times, at least for me, because it's not my company I'm hiring for. So I tell the candidates to do a lot of research on the front end of the company and then be prepared with those questions that are going to get at what's important to you. So, like you said, if like work-life balance is something that's
Yeah.
really important to you in your new career. Now, I also tell people like craft it in a way that's not like, what's your work-life balance like?
Right.
Like really think of a thoughtful question that's going to have them give an example of things that they do to value their employees. Like, do you have an employee recognition program? Or like, how are ways that you recognize your employees? Or how are ways that like, I could recognize another colleague for something that is really great that they're doing. And
Yeah.
I think you can tell a lot about a company's priorities from both their website as well as and social media for that matter.
Mhm.
And kind of the questions you ask. And I always tell people to have a couple questions prepared, even if you don't get a chance to ask them, because sometimes you might not. But more often than not, I feel like you do. So really think about what's important to you in your new job, your new career, your new company,
Mhm.
and then try to ask a question about that because that's how you're truly going to get a feel. And then obviously the recruiter, like you said, it really depends on the position, but there might be some companies that a recruiter knows more well than more better, better than others. So it's always great to be like when I can share information, I do. Again, like there's a couple companies that I've worked with where I know they have transitioning educators working there that they really value. So
Mhm.
I can tell a candidate that up front, makes them feel a little more confident, and then we can go from there. Or I'll say, like, this is a really kind of small organization. There's 15 people who work there. So this is kind of the feel of a small organization because maybe come from a school or really anywhere, but like working at a 3,000 person company is a very different feel than working at a 15-person company. And it's funny, one of the principals I used to work with, and it stuck with me. This was my first job out of college, my first teaching job, my first school. I worked at a huge secondary school, which is in Northern Virginia, 6 through 12. And we had, I believe, total like, I mean, it was like 5,000 kids. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of teachers, right? So, but he said the best way to run a large organization is by keeping it small. So making subgroups within the school or like somehow that was his job, figuring out a way to make it still feel small and personal,
Mhm.
even though it was a huge organization. So I think there's something said for that in the way you approach a business.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of it's just how you structure it. But I do think there's a lot you can tell from the outside, but then also don't be afraid to just ask your question. So you go into a job interview or go into a new job knowing how it is. Now, of course, things could be different when you get there, and that's always going to happen, right? But I do think that that'll just help you make a candidate make a more informed decision
Yeah.
and really what's important to them.
Absolutely. So next question is about branding, and that's kind of always been my thing, in terms of how I was going to establish myself as a recruiter. If you follow me or see my LinkedIn page, I'm very transparent with who I am, and I feel like that's kind of part of the candidate experience. They know who I am as much as I know who they are. If they're trusting me to find a new position, then I want them to know who Matt is outside of Matt the recruiter. And
Yep.
it's a unique perspective for you because you're coming at this branding yourself as Katy, but also branding your company and Recruit Ed. So, what are some of the ways that you've tried to marry those two things and know to speak to different audiences in that regard of, give it some insight in terms of how you recruit and at the same time your company mission statement and how that all aligns?
Yeah, that is a great question and something I'm also pretty mindful of because, like you said, like it is my brand.
Mhm.
So first of all, kind of like you, I think I don't know if I read it somewhere or someone gave me a piece of advice. It's always like the things that stick with you, but they said like the best way to present yourself on social media or LinkedIn or whatever is to be yourself because that's what's going to attract people or not. I mean, and I say that like we all might not be for everybody, right? But it's important to find someone that is a good match for you. And so I think showing little bits of your personality like is really important by kind of being a little bit organic in maybe your writing or things that you share. Like that's where like on my Instagram, I try to be a little bit more playful.
Mhm.
Knowing your audience on Instagram is a little bit different. Like that's a different social media site than LinkedIn. Like on LinkedIn, I'm not going to share necessarily a funny reel
Right.
that's like poking fun at whatever, or kind of being silly, me being silly. I'm going to present a more polished, professional like image, but at the same time, I think it's important to be true to yourself and not try to be someone else because while you might take nuggets from other people, I think it's very apparent when people aren't being themselves and trying to be something, or someone's going to figure that out at some point. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important when it comes to branding. And then also, I guess, I mean, I also present content differently for companies and then for like candidates. So I think that's also important, like to kind of know your audience and what their pain points are, what they're looking for, what kind of information they need, and kind of tailoring it to them. Like if I'm giving tips, which like on Tuesdays on my Instagram, I give a tip Tuesday. So it's all that's for transitioning educators because that's kind of my audience there. If
Right.
I'm posting something about Recruit Ed and like corporate partnerships, I'm going to do that in a very different way. And maybe there'd be like a one pager about my company or direct them to my website or something like that. So I do think it's important to like know your audience, but be true and authentic to yourself and just kind of be like, show all sides, like kind of like you said, like that you're a person too. You're not just in this for transactional purposes.
Right.
Of course, it's a business and whatever, but that you are a person too, and you care about your clients and your candidates. That's something that's important to me. And that I want to shine through is that I am customer focused. And perhaps that's like from our like background in education, like you're very customer people focused,
Yeah.
and recruiters in general, like, are people focused. So I think it's important if you're in a people focused role, you need to actually back that up and show yourself as a person and
Yeah.
different aspects.
Absolutely. So next question, I'm really excited for you to answer just because you're your own boss and you get to decide the hiring practices and technology. So, working in the recruitment industry, there's so many different tools at our disposal, so many different applicant tracking systems and CRMs that you can use, project management tools. And, for you, you get to choose, hey, this is what I want. It's not like this is what you have to use. You can do the research and say, this kind of aligns best with what I want to accomplish. So how do you try to stay up to date with, those hiring practices, those different tools? AI is so huge now in recruitment. How do you, since you get to call the shots, pick and choose and put together what you want to be the tools at your disposal?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And I was thinking about this. I've said that on all your questions because I just think these are awesome. But I was thinking about this because since I don't work for a big company, when I read, because you showed me these questions beforehand, when I saw AI, I'm like, wait, like, are people really using AI? And then I'm like, I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, no, for me, that's not necessary. I have used AI for different things, but for me, it's not part of my daily communication because I'm not like out there. It's a little different for me. So I will tell you, I'm not out there soliciting for candidates
Mhm.
probably as much as the typical recruiter.
Right.
So I don't need as many of the tracking like type, systems or things to find me candidates.
Right.
I don't need that as much because I get a lot of organic candidate traffic.
Mhm.
Sadly, it's because of the state of education and the state of people working in education that
Right.
I don't need to go out and solicit for candidates. And that's, like I always say, I am never in the business of convincing an educator to leave the field because we need good educators. We
Yeah.
need them more than anything. Like I want them for my own kids, like
Right.
selfishly. But
Yeah.
but if it's what's in your heart and you really need to make a career change to be happy, then I'm all about helping people do that because that was exactly me. That
Yeah.
was my position. So I think I more need those systems on the other side where it's finding companies to partner with that want to outsource their staffing. So I've played around with a bunch of different things, and I will tell you, I have a hard time. Now, maybe this is part of my problem, but I have a hard time wrapping my brain around the like automated AI type stuff when it comes to talking to a company.
Yeah.
I can see though, if I worked for a bigger company, how I might need that because I actually did some work, like some contract work with a recruiting company.
Mhm.
And we used all that stuff through LinkedIn and Indeed. And now I can't remember the other system we used, but we used some systems on the back end
Yeah.
to find candidates and reach out to them and communicate. And it was very helpful. So I will say it was nice because you had your text, your email about like next steps for this job, and you just typed in their names and modified a few things, and then it went right to them. So I
Yeah.
can see the benefit of that. But for me, I have found that the way I like to run my business, at least now, because I am so niche and small, like I'm a small business. I'm not, like I said, working with hundreds of companies. So I have the benefit of being able to be more personal. However, I have thought like, how could I better automate my business to find companies? And that's where I come up a little bit short because I feel like there's a lot of technology out there
Yeah.
that helps find candidates, but I haven't found any good. So if you know of any, I haven't found any good technology that helps find companies. Like I found people that are like, oh, I can give you access to a database of top companies that hire this type of person, but then
Mhm.
I don't know if they're outsourcing. So like it's a
Right.
little bit different. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like to place my candidates as if I worked for them. So that's where I've kind of, to be honest, like struggled a little bit in like making my job less manual,
Hmm.
but at the same time, still trying to reach the appropriate people in the appropriate way, like companies, like CEOs that are making those decisions, or people that are in charge of the talent acquisition at the company, reaching out to them. And for me, what's been the biggest bang for my buck, to be quite honest, is networking. I
Yeah.
feel like it always goes back to networking, like, oh, my friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, they were talking about how they love hiring teachers. And then I mentioned that I know a girl who actually, that's all she does is work with those type of people. So a lot of that, I like try to stay up on the research. And quite honestly, I need to do a little bit better because I feel like there are systems that could probably help me
Yeah.
find those companies a little bit easier than what
Yeah.
I'm doing now.
Like a business development tracking system. Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure.
Yes.
Probably out there. I'm also not aware of it myself, but if you're listening, watching, and you know of one, let us know. I'm certainly curious.
Yeah. There has to be, right?
Yeah.
Like, I keep thinking, I'm like, where's this company, this dream company that I need right
Yeah.
now that like targets, company? There has to be. I've
Puts it
Googled
all
it a
together.
million times and I can't find it, but I'm like, there
Yeah.
has to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Or maybe we should create one. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and perfect segue to the last question I have. Then and it's going to be a little different for you because, I'm asking for advice that you would give to new recruiters, but I want to get your perspective just
Mhm.
because the recruitment industry right now is still chaotic. I think we've been saying that for some time that
Yeah.
there's layoffs, there's cutbacks. People have had to leave the recruitment industry and find new ventures, unfortunately, but there are some that are choosing to now take this as an opportunity to work for themselves, be their own boss, start their own recruitment company. So, for you, as someone who has done this,
Mhm.
what advice would you give to someone who's kind of at that early stage of, I think I want to move forward and start my own recruitment company? What insight can you share with them on, how they can best get started on that practice?
Yeah. So I think one of the first things to think about is talking to as many people as you can about different aspects. So, like I knew I wanted a website. I knew I didn't have a ton of money to throw at it, but I knew that was important to me because I wanted to refer people there. I wanted to get traffic going there. So, I reached out to a couple people and said, like again, hey, who do you know anyone in web development? And like, so that was really important to me. So I think first of all is like prioritizing what's important.
Hmm.
Second of all, I think also like starting small was really good for me because I started with like, I don't, this is just how I did it, but I started with someone and I actually didn't charge them. Like I was like, hey, it was, um, it was like an ed tech company. So I said, hey, I have a huge pool of talent that I'd love to like work with you to fill this position. And the lady actually, it was like a cold reach out. The
Hmm.
lady was like, oh my gosh, yes, I'd love that. And so I learned so much through that first interaction, and it was successful. And my candidate actually ended up getting hired, but there was like no pressure in the sense of like money was on the line, whatever. And I told her up front, I'm like, listen, I just am trying to like learn and absorb and see how you work and see how I work and see how like this relationship is working. So that was really helpful to me is to like talk to different people and then to really like kind of get my toe wet a little bit
Hmm.
um with the different, recruiter. And then I mentioned it first that I worked a little bit with a company as kind of like a contractor.
Hmm.
And that was really helpful because I got to see things I liked and I didn't like. And for me, one of the things I did not like was doing all the background checks type stuff and
Yeah.
doing phone screening and like that just wasn't for me. But
Hmm.
I wouldn't have known that if I didn't go through that whole process.
Right.
So, and I think when you're starting your own business, the nice thing is, and this was hard for me, but like I don't have to do that if I don't want to. Like I
Right.
should really, if I'm going out on my own, I mean, of course, there's aspects that you enjoy more than others, but really, like you can decide how you want your business to be spun. And
Hmm.
I think also like creating a unique place or value add in the industry is really important. Like when you're thinking about your business, think about like, how am I different? Because there are millions of recruiters out there, right? So, like, if you're going to start your own business, what makes yours different? For me, it was that I work with transitioning educators, and I was a transitioned educator,
Yeah.
and I also have experience in the corporate world, so I'm kind of marrying those, and so that was kind of like my niche. But for someone else, it might be, oh my gosh, you have 20 years recruiting experience at the most successful financial advisory
Right.
company in the world. Like again, for everybody, it's a little bit different. So I think just kind of being upfront. And then obviously, like just a practical thing is like obtaining an LLC and doing the work on that end.
Yeah.
Like I talked to some people and also getting a contract, like for me, now again, a lot of it comes down to networking. I have a very good friend whose husband's an attorney who helped me with my contract. So like there are ways that you can and this is what I mean by start small. Like you don't have to have a big fancy company to be
Right.
successful and make money and help people.
Right.
So I think that's important to know is like if you do have a small business, and my dad actually growing up was an attorney and went out on his own in private practice, and seeing him work for a big firm as opposed to himself, it was different. Like I even
Oh,
draw
yeah.
back to that. Like when you have a small business, it is going to look different. So to go in realizing that, but then also like it's kind of liberating because you can run it, like you said, how you want. And you
Mhm.
can tell people like I don't do background checks. That's where like this is how my recruiting company kind of operates. So
Yeah.
anyone who's thinking about it, my other advice is like, and this is just me, like what do you have to lose? I mean, if you don't try, now, of course, you have to be mindful with finances and things like that. So,
Right.
like, you have to be smart, but then also, you'll never know if you don't try. And maybe you partner with someone, maybe have someone that works on a certain end and you do this. So, I just think it's important to do your research, be very calculated, stay small at first, realize that as a small business, if you're going out on your own, and then also I will say to always have integrity. Like if I was in the recruiting business and I was going into the recruiting business on my own, to be very respectful of and I say this because like stealing clients or
Right.
something like that. Like I think it's always important to have integrity in what you do. And again, like I don't ever want people to think I'm encouraging educators to leave because I'm not. But
Right.
I want to facilitate if that's what they want to professionally do. I want to be there to support
Yeah.
and help them be successful. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that was
Absolutely.
kind of a long-winded answer, but
Sounds great.
yeah.
So then before I let you go, Katie, just take a minute here and, plug where people can find you, where they can follow you and, the company one more time. And
Yeah, awesome. So my company's Recruit Ed, and it looks like Recruited. So recruitedllc.com is my website. And then I'm on Katy Garvey on LinkedIn. And then I also have just kind of, again, it's more playful, fun, where you can get informal tips. It's Recruited LLC on Instagram, but it's just Recruit Ed. You'll find it talent acquisition. So any of those places, I would love to connect with anybody and try to help again, companies or transitioning educators, just people in recruiting. I think it's so important. And I've learned so much, I will say, Matt, from you and
awesome.
other people in the industry that have more experience than I do. Honestly, it's been so helpful to just see how like you operate working for a company as opposed to how I do. And then you with, we have the same background,
Yeah.
but just how, there are so many places and just so much knowledge out there to soak up. So I really appreciate
Yeah.
you doing this. I love like tuning into Maximize Monday because I just find it's so interesting to see people's stories and kind of soak up what they have to say.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah.
yeah,
Katie, I'm sure this won't be the last time I reach out to ask you to join
great.
for one of these. If you're not following Katie, make sure you're doing that. Thank you for listening, for watching, and we'll see you next week.